Begin the current Daf Mesech Nazir Daf Nun Dalad. We begin 13 lines down at the top of the Amud, where the Gemara finishes off the discussion of the previous Mishnah, which we were discussing regarding the things that the Nazir is megalech aleh. One of the three prohibitions of the Nazir is becoming tamei, and we said if it becomes tamei, is like the pasuk says, it's going to be seiser as minyan harishin. So the Mishnah just concludes regarding the purification process, and then he has to start over counting again. The Gemara just clarifies who is the Tana of our Mishnah. Today's Daf. So discussed in today's Daf are the items for which a Nazir is ein megalech. That's the halacha of the next Mishnah, even though he does become tamei mes. That's the unique halacha which we've seen regarding Nazir. Eretz Ha'am, we get into a discussion that takes us into the next Daf. The Rabban initiated that a person is considered tamei mes. There's a lot of different gizeres the Rabban of Tumah that we discuss in our Mishnah. One of them is Eretz Ha'am. So the machlek is a question of the Gemara: is it mishum avira gazer? Is it because of actually even the airspace? Even if you have some type of a chatzitza, a hefsek, it doesn't make a difference. In the airspace of Eretz Ha'am, you have a tumah, or is it just the earth, the clumps of the earth? If you're touching it, or if there's no chatzitza, there's no interposition, then it's going to be, but in the Avir, they didn't make such a gezerah. Also, the question of when does a Nazir Tameh begin a new count of Nazirais. Another important term in concept in today's daf is the well-known halacha of Safek Tumah B'Shas Harab Misfeker Tar. In general, when there's a suffix of tumah, which we learn out from the halachas actually of a saita, which obviously the adulterous woman has been doing things inappropriate in private, not in public, that's the halacha of tumah, which we learn out. So when it's in b'shas rama, suffix is going to be tar. Suffix tumah b'shas yachid, sveker tameh, then actually the doubt is going to be considered as tameh. So begin the current daf nun dalid, 13 lines down at the top of the yamud, that the previous the Mishnah had said. Umaza b'shlishi b'shvi. The Mishnah said that you spray yourself on day 3, day 7, b'seiser b'chulu, and it also goes ahead, and the Mishnah says the nose has to cut it. But here, umaza b'shlishi b'shvi, the previous day of Nazirs are cancelled, and ve'ina mascha limnois ila chitama maybe it's kabanaisa. So on that, those words which v'chulu of our Gemara quoting the Mishnah, that he doesn't start counting until he purifies himself and he brings his karbanis. So the Gemara wants to know the following question: Hadik Tani said in the Mishnah that he doesn't start counting Achi Tar until he purifies himself. When is that? Is that b'shvi koi? Is that going on the 7th day? Meaning when the Nazir becomes tamei, so he purifies himself day 3, 7. He tifles himself and he cuts his hair. He starts from that day to count his Nazir's Tahara, and he brings his Karbanis on day 8. And the Girsa takes out the words Ad the Ovid Herav Shemesh. Umani, and who's the town of the Mishnah? Rebbe Eliezer. It'd be like Rebbe Eliezer that he said on Daf Yud Chesam Beis that you start counting right away. In other words, on the 7th day, right after you purified yourself, as we explained over there, that's when you start counting? I didn't maybe no. B'shminikai, it's going the 8th day. Maya Chetar was the Mishnah when it says until he purifies himself. It means Achiyavi Karbonaisa. It means until he brings his karbonis. Umani, and who's the time of the Mishnah? Rabban, he would be like the Rabban that they say V'kiddush Reisha B'yemahu. What's V'kiddush Reisha B'yemahu? That he sanctifies his head, that he starts growing it again and started counting again. It's the day he brings his karbonis. So when the Mishnah says that Achiyatahar, that's all the words the Mishnah says. What is Achiyatahar? Is Achiyatahar literally purification day 7? Even though you can bring your karbanis on the next day, like Rabbi Eliezer, or is it when you bring your karbanis, which is day 8? It says Gemara, Tashma Tzviga Raya Medigtani Seifa. In fact, we learned the Seifa of our Mishnah. The Seifa is the next Mishnah we're about to learn in a few lines, which is the flip side of those which you're not megalech aleha, even though there's tumah. The Mishnah there describes that maschel moin miyad. Regarding those cases that the Nazir does not bring a carbon of tumah, because that's distinct for the Nazir, that when he becomes tumah, he brings a carbon. So we say you spray yourself day 3, day 7, and the words of the next Mishnah are umaschel miyad. You start counting right away, which on day 7, because it has to be day 7, because there's no carbonis of tumah for the next Mishnah, what we call the Seifa. Oh, so says the Gemara, Hareisha must be the Reisha, meaning our previous Mishnah that we're middle discussing. Mayat Shitar, what did it mean until you purify? It doesn't say in our Mishnah, Masl Moin Miyad, like the Seifa. Obviously, when the Reisha says Achitar, why doesn't it say Miyad? Because not Miyad. It's not right when you purify. It's Atsuyavi Karbonaisa. It's until you bring his Karbanas, Umani, and therefore must be, who's the Tan of our Mishnah? Rabban, he must be going like Rabban. I mean, that they say Nazir Zitahara is Ad Shmini Loichayla. It does not take effect until day 8. And therefore, it means like the Rabban. Look at the next Mishnah. The Mishnah now tells us regarding on those things that the Nazir is not megalech. So even though he's becoming Tamei Mes, which we said already in our previous Mishnah, that's halacha b'shem Sinai, it's not whenever he becomes Tamei. There's certain types of Tumah and shiurin for Tumah that then the Nazir is going to be megalech alaha. So that's our Mishnah telling us, these things, even though you're going to become Tamei, a lot of them are rabbinic Tumah, and you're not going to have the halacha of being megalech. Says the Mishnah, Aval, but, haschachis v'parayis, this is the seifa of our previous Mishnah. The Gemara is going to explain exactly what are these protrusions and what are these overhangs, or those cases, or many different cases. Ubeis hapras, Beis hapras is a field that had a grave that was in that area, and it was plowed over. They went and they, as oftentimes happens, they start building something and they plow over the grave. So up until the area of 100 amas, Chacham were concerned that maybe the plow threw and dragged a bone the size of a barley corn up to a distance of 100 amas. So there, again, it has a tumah, but this tumah is only rabbinic. Va'eretz ha'amim. Another case is the land of the nations, meaning chutz la'aretz. The Rabbanan were geyser tumah, as the Gemara says in the first parak of Shabbos after Vav Med Aleph. So again, these are all have tumah, but the Nazir is not going to be galeach for these tumahs. So to v'hagoyel v'adoifik. Now, what is goyel v'adoifik? This is actually brought many times in Shas. Rashi in the first parak in Ksubas of Dal Mabez explains goyel is the covering of the coffin, and doifik is the walls of the side. Rabbein Tam finds it's difficult because the Gemara says in Chulnav Ayin Beis Amud Aleph that from the words in the pasuk that we actually quoted this pasuk in the previous daf, al panei hasada, on the surface of the field, that's l'rabas goyel v'adoifik. Sounds like that goyel v'adoifik are things that are revealed on the surface of the field, and these things that Rashi is describing are covered. So Rabbein Tam actually translates that goyel is the matzeva, is the tombstone, and the doifik are the stones that the matzeva is supported by, which Taisa says elsewhere explained at length, where this is discussed in Taisa and Brachas, and Shabbos, and Sukkah, and Ksubis, and Sanhedrin. So it's explained many times by Taisa throughout Shas, what is this goyel v'doifik, this machlekes Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi. Another case is v'reviyas dam. If you recall from our previous Mishnah, we spoke about a chatzi loig dam. That was a unique halacha Mishnah that we said, that the Nazir is going to be megaleach, but a quarter of a loig dam, he's not going to. And the oil, and the girsa really here is oil reiva atzamis, meaning that although a reiva atzamis, a quarter kav of atzamis, is metama ba'oil, but the Nazir is not going to be megaleach on that. And really, Taisa says, the Mishnah could have said, not a quarter of a loig dam or a quarter of a kav of atzamis, it could have said less than a half a loig dam or less than a half a kav, which really is the bigger chiddush. It's anything less, it doesn't have to be only a quarter. It's just that we picked shiurim that were explicit in the first parak of Ahalas, that they are metama ba'oil, which are quarter of a kav and quarter of a leg, but even so, they're not going to have the halach of Nazir Megaleach until you have, like our previous Mishnah said, a half a kav and a half a leg of dam. Another case says our Mishnah is v'kelim hanogim b'mes, vessels that touch a dead person, because the pasuk tells us that chiyamus meis alav, when this guy is going to come in contact with a dead person, not with a vessel that came in contact with a dead person, and therefore the Nazir is not megalech on that. And the Gemara is going to explain which kelim are we talking about. It's actually not every kelim. Another case is ubemei safrai, ubemei gamrai. In other words, a Nazir, let's say, is counting his naziris, and middle of his naziris, he becomes a mitzayra. So whether he made gamrai, what's he made gamrai? So Taisa explains, he made gamrai really is the word of yimei chilutai, meaning it just means that he's been confirmed. Mitzayra muchla is when he's confirmed for tumah, because there's really three stages of tzaras. There's the hezgir, which is quarantine, which we're not clear exactly his status. There's gamrai / chilute, which he's confirmed as mitzayra. And then zimei svarai, which is after he's purified, he's got to count 7 days till he purifies. So that's what our Mishnah is saying, whether it's Yimei Gamrai, meaning the days that he's confirmed as a Mitzayra of Tomo, or whether Yimei Savara, which is after he finished his Huchla, like the Pasuk says, the Kohen sees, it's been healed. Okay, now you're not just scot-free. You got to bring tzipayim, birds, cut your hair, you go amongst Machni Yisrael, but for 7 days you're Chutz La'Allah, meaning you're not allowed to have marital intimacy. On the 7th day you cut your hair again, and the day 8 you bring your karbanos of tzaras, and those 7 days are called Yimei Savara, the days of your counting. But they don't count, as our Mishnah is going to tell us, towards your days of Naziris. At the same time, they don't knock off all the days that you counted up until this point. Now, Taisa says, he found in a commentary on Masechtas Nazir, that explains why do you need to say both Yemei Sfacha and Yemei Gamrei? Why do you need to say, just say when you're Mitzayra, it's not going to knock off what you counted, but it won't count towards. And also, regarding this halacha of that it won't be Nazir Megaleach, so it says Taisus, well, it's not really true because you have to Megaleach anyway, but as we're going to say in a moment, because you have to cut off your hair because that's Mitzayra, but it would share the other commonalities. Why do you have to say both of them? So that commentary says, had it said Sfarai, the days of the counting, I would have thought to say, yeah, but you make Gamrai, the days of your Mitzayra Muchlit, which is more severe, obviously you're in the state of Tumah then actually maybe it would be Saiser. Meaning, maybe it would knock off all the days you had up until now that you count. Let's say you're Nazir to 100 days, and 30 days in you become a Mitzayra. Maybe I would think to say that it would knock off the days. So that's why I have to say, you may Gamrai. Now, how did it say only you may Gamrai, the days of you when you Mitzayra Muchlit? I would have thought to say, okay, but you may Svira, which is more kal because you're already in your purification stage, maybe it would count towards the days of Naziris. So therefore you have to say both, you may Gamrai and you may Svarai, to tell you that, okay, look, it's not going to count towards your Naziris, but it's not going to knock off what you counted up until now. You needed to say but. But Tosfos says Tzarchin because it's not really true. Because you should only say you may Safarai. And you cannot say like that Mefarish wanted to say, but I would have thought to say you may Gamar would be Saiser. How could that be? If you may Chilutai, you may Gamar would be Saiser, then what's the nafke mina that you tell me you may Svach is not Saiser? You already Saiser because you may Gamrai. The counting of a purification mitzvah only comes after the confirmed tzaras. So Taisus remains with Tarachim. Why do you need to say both cases? Just say you may Gamrai. Say that you may of when there's a mitzvah muchlet that it's Eina Oilalai, but it's not Saiser Zekaimin. Why didn't you say that? And then I would know, obviously, if you may Svachai. But Akabam, that's a question Taisus has. Now, says the Mishnah, Al elu eina nazir megalech. So whatever we just said up until now, all these cases of the Mishnah, the Nazir does not have to cut off his hair and start over his Naziris. Now, Taisa points out, as we just mentioned in passing before, that's not going on, you may Svarai and you may Gamrai. Why? Because you need to cut off your hair, not because you may Svarai and you may Gamrai, but simply because of your Tzaras. That Mitzayra has to cut off his hair als halachas of Mitzayra, not als a Tumas Mitzayra that is the Nazir that's Tameh. So obviously not going on that. It's rather going on the other halachas, that those Tumas that we described, Schachas and Prais, Beis Apras, Eretz Amim, Gerle B'Doifik, Revi'ez Dam, Reiva Tumas, Kem Nagim Meis, all those things, Lamaisa, the guy is becoming Tameh, doesn't make a difference. He does not have the halacha of a Nazir Tameh that has to be Megaleach, but obviously the Mitzayra would have to because of the halachas of a Mitzayra. So the reason why we mention the Mitzayra is not for this halacha of that he doesn't have to be Megaleach. It's on the other halacha that we'll see on Amud Beis of the Mishnah that is regarding that it doesn't count, but it doesn't knock off what you had up until now. Okay, but the Mishnah continues, Umazah b'shlishu b'shvi, that you have to go ahead and you spray yourself with the purification waters on day 3 and day 7. Here also some Taisus have add on the words that that's also not going on Yemei Gamim Svarai, because actually you don't require Hazah when you're Mitzvah purifying yourself. You don't have to be sprayed with ash waters or the Paraduma, that's only for Tumas Mes. And there's also the halach of Kelim and Nagim Mes. If a guy touched vessels that touch a dead person, he also doesn't require Hazah, because only tummy till the evening. It doesn't require Hazah. And also it sounds like from the Gemara, that's not going on Kelim and Nagim Mes, which, because the Gemara will explain that these Kelim are wooden vessels, which whoever touched a wooden vessel that touched a dead person does not require Hazah. So rather it's going to other cases, under Revi'ez Dam, Girl of Daifik, all those cases is where we say you have to purify yourself day 3, day 7, as a continuum of days. Oh, and now these next two halachas is really what we said the Mitzayr is going to have, but all these cases have this halacha. Ve'ena Saiser, and it's not Saiser es hakoidmin, it's whatever you counted up until this point is not knocked off, but, as Tais actually adds on the words, but it's also not going to count towards his days of Naziris. And, says the Mishnah, now, so he starts counting right after he purifies himself, right away when he purifies himself, meaning when he stops counting from when he became Tameh, because the days of his Tameh do not count towards his Naziris. And also the carbon einloi. There's no carbon of Nazir Tameh that he has to bring, of a chatas, and a oilas, ha'oif, and a asham. That is only for the halacha of Nazir that's Megaleach has to bring as a Nazir Tameh. So although he's technically a Nazir that's Tameh, he doesn't bring the Kabbans of a Nazir Tameh. It's only from the previous Mishnah. The thing is Megaleach Allah. These, he wouldn't have to bring a carbon. Now, Taisa brings that a question that Rashi, or it could be Reb Moshe Me'ivra, either one, has a question that I understand all the halachas of our Mishnah that although it's not being seis as a kohen, it's not going to knock off all that you counted up until this point. I could understand the Tosfos not going to count towards it, but the problem he has is with kelim anoigim emes, which the Gemara is going to tell us it's even klei shetef, like a wooden vessel. You touched a wooden vessel, touched a dead person. When a Nazir touches that wooden vessel, it's only talking up until the evening. So why wouldn't that be oilalo? It's not like he's tumah for 7 days. It's not like has halacha of tumas mes. So he just wonders why it wouldn't be oilalo. But be that as it may, all these cases in the Mishnah we said, it's not seiser, but it's not oilalo. But there's two exceptions actually. Be'emes amru, in truth they said, you may hazav v'hazava, if a Nazir started counting his Naziras, and then in the middle it became a Zav, or she became a Zava. That's case number one. Or v'mei has Geirusha Metzera, which we discussed only up until now. We discussed v'yimei Chilute, which is called Yimei Gamrei, which when he's confirmed Metzera, or Yimei Safara, which is the days after he already purified and he's already counting towards it. But then there's something called Yimei Hezgeirah, which is when the tzaras just appears on the person's body, and the kohen quarantines him to see what the status is, and if it stays the same or if it gets lighter. So during the days of quarantine, those are actually going to count towards his days of Nazirais, in contrast to the other cases which it's not going to knock off, but it's not going to count. Those two, if it becomes a Zava or becomes the days of Hezget Metzera, they actually will be counted towards his counting of the Naziris. So now we go by one to explain the halachas of our Mishnah, and according to Mishnah Masechtas Alois, to explain these items that our Mishnah is describing, that yes, you'll be Tameh, but you will not have the halacha of Nazir Megalech, as the Mishnah describes. It says in the Mishnah Alois, what's considered these overhangs? They are Elon HaMesach Ala Aretz. If you have a tree that these leaning over the ground, so like from the Lashon of Schach. So the Gemara in Daf Nun Zayin Menaf explains that biblically, this is not really a problem about oil. Why isn't it a problem about oil? Because the branches are very far one from the other, and it does not have a width of a tefach. So even if definitely there was a gezayis with a mess beneath one of the branches, still biblically the nazir can be tar, even if he goes beneath all the branches. It's only rabbinically that it's going to be considered tameh when it goes beneath the branches. So again, that's case number one of Eschachas, that you're rabbinically tameh, but you're not going to qualify for that biblical halacha of nazir megalech. Case number two was haprois, the things that are protrusions. There are stones hayotzis min hageder that come out of a wall, which is near a cemetery. Now there is a stillborn that's beneath one of the stones. The chamor geyser tama for someone who goes beneath one of the stones, even though that this is a suffix tama b'shazram. You're walking in the street beneath one of these stones that's sticking out of the wall. The halacha generally is midaraisa, that you're going to be tahar, as we know the class suffix tama b'shazram sveika is tahar. But rabbinically, they initiated a gezer that is considered as tama, which the Gemara in Nida Taisa says sounds like that. But if you went beneath all the protrusions, all the stones sticking out, then you would be definitely tama. But when it's under one of the stones and you go under one of them and we don't know, the Rabbanan, although it's suffix tama, but that you're not sure and you would be tahar. But again, rabbinically it's going to be considered tama. But again, since only rabbinic tama, it's not going to qualify for the halacha of nazir migaleach aleha. Case number three. First of all, we said also Beis Pras, like we described that halacha, that it's also only rabbinically a tumah, so therefore that's going to be not nazir megalech alav. And then the next case was Eretz Ha'amim. If a nazir started in land outside Eretz Yisrael, he's also going to have this gezerah de rabbanon that is considered as a tamei meis. So you're going to be tamei, but you're not going to be megalech aleha. Now, Ibalu, the following question: Eretz Ha'amim. This halacha of the Eretz Ha'amim that we have, how do you qualify this halacha? Is this halacha mishum avira gazol? Did they make it because of the ear space that a person is going to be considered as tamei? Meaning, for example, let's say someone goes in a box or a closet or some type of container that's more than 40 sa, which that box is not makabel tumah because it's considered as a very big thing. So it's not considered as a kli. Or let's say he's going the bridge over land out of Eretz Yisrael. Or he goes in a wagon or in a boat where they're more stringent, more than an oil hames, meaning the halacha by oil hames is that if you go in a box that's bigger than 40 sa, you're considered like as if you're in a different area, and it's chatzitza, and you're not going to be considered tamei from the oil hames. So the question that's being asked is, did we say that the Chum was so machmer in their gzeir and Eretz Amim that they were geyser even on the airspace, meaning nothing to do with the ground beneath? You're talking in a different area because you have this oil that you're in of more than 40 sa, but they didn't want you to leave Eretz Yisrael to Chutzla. It's that they made a gezeira that you're going to be telling me just from the airspace, even if you're in a box that's bigger than 40 sa. Or maybe no, the gezeira was only because of the ground. Meaning, specifically if you're leaning over the ground with a geyser, like someone who's leaning over a dead person. Now, why would they geyser? Not because they don't want you to leave Eretz Yisrael. You're right. If they didn't want you to leave Eretz Yisrael, then they would have made this interesting gezeira on the Aver. No. It's because either, like Taisa explains, because of those who died in the Mabel, which the old Eretz Yisrael didn't have that, and Chutz La'aretz had that. So all the people that died over there, and especially in Bavel, where many people, the Jewish people were, or because the abundance of Jews that were killed in Chutz La'aretz. So we're concerned that there's dead bodies everywhere. So therefore, we don't want you to be mahel over the ground. But if you're going in a box, you're going in a plane, you're going into something, a wagon or a boat, then no, because you have a chatzitza between you and the ground. It's not the airspace, it's the ground. Says Taisis, how could the Gemara have such a question? In the first parak in Shabbos after Tezvav and Beis, the Gemara says that they were geyser on Gusha and Avera. It says they were geyser on the ground and on the airspace. So what's the Gemara's question over here? So he says, no, there, when we said Gusha and Aver, we meant something different. We meant whether someone's touching the ground, that we meant Gusha, or whether you're leaning over the ground without any interruption of the ground, that's what we called Aver. But if you're coming in a box where there's interruption, that we didn't say over there. And that's our question. Did we even say the airspace, even though you have a hefsek between you and the ground? But Taisa brings a question from Rabbi Yaakov Moralanes that the Mishnah in the second parak in the Olis teaches the following halacha. It says, "Ve'elu metamid b'mago b'masa v'loy ba'oil." These things contaminate with touch, carrying, and not with the halacha of oil. And what are they? Eretz ha'amim, ubeis ha'prasin, etc. So it says, wait a second. In our Gemara, it sounds obvious that everyone holds there's going to be tumas oil when you're at least leaning over the ground without a half-stick of shida teva migdal. We're wondering, even shida teva would even be them. But everyone agrees that, yeah, but the Mishnah in the Olis says clearly that there's no tumas oil, there's only magamasa. So how can we understand that? So Rabbi Yaakov Merlain's answers, he says, there is talking about the earth of Chutz La'aretz that was brought to Eretz Yisrael. It's not in Eretz Amim. It was brought to Eretz Yisrael. That Gusha, we're saying, will omitam magamasa, not with oil. Here we're talking about you actually went into Eretz Amim. That everyone agrees to be mal over the mitami. The question is it even with a hefsek of a sheda teva migdal? Another interpretation, Rabbi Tami says that no, actually that Mishnah in Olis was taught before the last gezerah of that it says in Masechta Shabbos. That you're right, originally they were only geyser on the magamasa and not on the aver anything. But subsequently they were geyser even on oil, according to everyone. That Mishnah Olis was before that last gezerah. Or a third teretz he says is that no, the halacha is that it's not matame until you take your head and the majority of your body going into Eretz Amim, like it sounds like from the end of our sugya, and it's not enough when you stick out your hand, because oil hames would be matama even you stick in your hand. When the Mishnah Olis is saying that, when they have tumas oil, that's only by tumas mes, but by Eretz Amim you don't have, says places that's only, it doesn't have it for your hand. But if you have the head and majority of your body, then they would have like our sugya saying over here. It says three different ways how to resolve the contradiction with the Mishnah Masechtas Olis. That's the Gemara's question. Is this tumas Eretz Amim mishum avira even mamish for the airspace? Or is it only because of Gusha? Says Gemara Tashma being a raya from our Mishnah. What's the raya? Our Mishnah said that these people that are tummy, with some of these rabbinic tummies, one of them being Eretz Ha'amim, it says, okay, look, you're not going to have to be Megalech, it won't be counted towards you in the Naziras, it won't take away from the count. Okay, you got to spray yourself day 3, day 7. Says the Gemara, wait a second. V'yamin, if you're going to say Mishum Avira, that the halacha of Tumas Eretz Amim was a chidush, which you don't find anywhere else. It was, even in the airspace, even if you're in a separate box, you're going to be Tameh. So wait a second, Hazal Lomali, as Tosha explains, there's no logic to require for Eretz Amim being sprayed with the Paraduma waters day 3, day 7, because you're telling me that he's becoming tummy even if there's a hefsek between him and the ground, which has nothing to do with Tumas Oila Mes to require Azog 3 and 7. Meaning, if you would tell me, because, as the Gemara wants to prove, Elav Mishum Gusha, must be that, no, Eretz Ha'amim we metame because of the earth. Whether because you have the Mesei Mabel over there, because you have many Jews that were killed in Chutz La'aretz, but be that as it may, it's related to the Tumah of mess. That's why it's about the ground. So I could understand why you would require it to be sprayed day 3, day 7, even though it's rabbinic, but because it's based on the concern of Tumas mess. But if you tell me because Avira has nothing to do with dead people, because you're not even have any oil over the gush. So then why you tell me you're being Mazik Gimel V'Zayin? Obviously, Tumas Eretz Amim is because of Gusha, not because of Avira. The Gemara said, not true. Truth, I can tell you, Mishum Avira, the reason is because of the airspace. When did we say this halacha that you have to spray yourself? Day 3, day 7 is Asha Ara. Going to other cases in the Mishnah, we have many cases in the Mishnah. Beis Pras, we had many different halachas. You're right, it's not going on the case of Eretz Amim. Eretz Amim would not require being sprayed day 3 to 7 because it has nothing to do. It's a huge chiddush. It's like about an aver because we don't want you leaving Eretz Yisrael. We're going to make you tamei. Has nothing to do with being sprayed day 3, day 7. Nothing to do with tumas mess. I think Gemara says it's logical the way we're answering. What's the logic? I'll prove to you that the halacha of being sprayed day 3, day 7 is not going on all the cases, and therefore I could say the same thing regarding this case. Because you tell me what's one of the other cases in the Mishnah? One of the other cases in the Mishnah was v'kelim hanogim emes. If you have vessels that touch a dead person, so that's a case that we said, okay, look, you're going to be tamei, and the halacha is going to be that you're not going to have to. It's not going to count towards, not going to take away. But says the Gemara, hani kelim b'nei hazoinen. You think if someone touched these vessels, he has to be sprayed day 3 and day 7? What do you mean? But the one who touches them is only tummy till the evening. He's not even tummy for 7 days. Why would I think to say that you would have to have Hazor Gimel V'Zayin? That wouldn't even make sense. You're not even tummy for 7 days. You're only tummy till the evening. It was a dead person. A vessel touched a dead person. And now the person who touched that was Avi Avois, becomes Avatoma. The person who touches the vessel becomes a Rishon, is only tummy till the evening. Obviously, that this halacha of Gimel V'Zayin is going on Sha'ara, is going on the other cases, not on Keli HaNogim Emes, and therefore I can say the same thing here regarding the halacha of Eretz Amim. This of requiring Hazaz Gimel V'Zayin is not going on Eretz Amim, because Eretz Amim could even be B'Shem Aviva, and the Virat has no application of being sprayed day 3, day 7. Now, Taisa says, it sounds like that the Gemara understands that this Keli HaNageh B'Mes is even by what's called Klei Shetef, a vessel that's like a wooden vessel, which touches a dead person, which makes the vessel into Avatama. Whoever touches that vessel becomes Tameh as a Rishon Tama only up until the evening, like when someone touches someone who touched a dead person, which you don't have to be sprayed. So obviously, that halacha of Gimel V'Zayin would not be going on the Keli HaNageh B'Mes, and therefore it's going to other cases, and therefore we can say the same thing regarding Eretz Amim. But Taisa wonders, he says, wait a second, why can't the Gemara just answer that these vessels are metal vessels, and the one who touches them will be tummy for 7 days, and therefore it will require Gimel V'Zayin, because we know Cher V'Ari Kechel, as we said in the previous stuff, that the metal vessel that touches a dead person is halacha like dead person itself. What's the Gemara bringing a raya? Must be from Keli HaNageh B'Mes that, oh come on, it doesn't make sense. It must be under Sha'ar, and if I can say something regarding Eretz Amim, it's not true. Keli HaNageh B'Mes could be a metal vessel that touched a dead person, and that's why you're tamei for 7 days, like touching the dead person itself. So what's the Gemara's raya from Keli HaNageh B'Mes? So Rabbi Tam says that no, you obviously cannot explain the halacha of a Mishnah talking about a metal vessel. Why? Says Rabbi Tam, because then actually this would be a halacha of Nazir Migalechala. Because Cher V'Arei Kechal. If you touch a dead person, you have to cut off the hair and start over the Naziris. Our Mishnah is saying cases when you don't have to be Megalechela. You're going to be Tameh, there's not going to be Megalechela. If it was a metal vessel, you actually would have to be Megalechela. But then Rabbeinu Chaim HaKaim sent him quoting a pasuk in Yeshaya. He says, Eza Bayis Asher Tivnuli. It's a pasuk in Yeshaya. He says basically, what house are you going to build for me that if you're telling me that's really true that a Nazir would have to be Megalechela, then the same equivalent would be that a kohen is prohibited, whatever a nazir is forbidden, kohen is forbidden to have that same type of tumah too. Says Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen, there's no house that a kohen would ever be able to go into, because there's no metal vessel that was never once especially in the Altaim, someone dies in his home. So now there's the tumah of the metal. He says even the nails that make the building are tameh now, and you tell me that the metal has the same halacha like the dead person. So he says, as the Gemara says in Masechta Smachos, that any tumah that Nazir would make malech the kohen is prohibited on. So he says, how are you ever allowed to go into a house? He says also, we learned in the Bryce and Tosefta in Masechtas Oles that says over there's 4 tumas that you could have from a dead person. How do you have 4 tumas? So if you have the dead person and the keli is touching the dead person, then you have a person touching that keli, then you have a keli touching that person, all those 3 will be tameh for 7 days. The 4th one, whether it's a person or a vessel, would only be tameh till the evening. Says the Brisa, when do we say that? That's for Truma and Kachim. But for Nazir, he would not be megaleach only if he touched the dead person itself. Says Taisus, what's that coming to exclude? The keli who touched the dead person, which is what they're talking about over there. Because most definitely he would have to do teklachas, let's say for the other cases mentioned over there, Eva ben Achai and all those other things. So obviously the Mishnah over there is talking about a metal vessel, because if it was not a metal vessel, you wouldn't be able to have 4 levels of tumah. It's specifically by a metal vessel where the Torah tells you cherev kachel. You say that the sword is like the dead person itself. Then you have, as explained over there, that you could have that the metal vessel touching the dead person is like the dead person. So the person who's touched, so that metal vessel is tummy for 7 days. The person who's touching the metal vessel is like touching a dead person, he's tummy 7 days. And the vessel is touching him, which is also a chiddush we're going to say in a moment, also has a tumah like the person himself. So I could have those 3 layers of all having 7 days of tumah. But if it was a kli shatef, if it was a wooden vessel, let's say for example, it wouldn't have the halacha like the dead person itself, and then you wouldn't have the person touching that wooden vessel to be tummy 7 days, and definitely not the garments on the person touching that would definitely not have it. So obviously to a metal vessel, and still we see that the nazir is not megaleach, even though it's a metal vessel, which seems to be clear that it's says not like this halacha that we're saying, that it same thing would be that a kohen would not be prohibited to come into such a home. We see that the metal vessel does not have the same halacha as the mess itself. So then the question is, wait, why didn't we explain the halacha of the Mishnah by kli matches? So says Taisus that he says that because anyways we hold that it's going asha'ara, like we're saying, because we're trying to say with eretz amim. So okay, so obviously it's not going in all the cases mazagim zayin, because we said yomei svara v'yomei gamra. He says it's not only the halach of eretz amim. We have the case of the mitzayra. Mitzayra also not b'nei hazan. So obviously there's also sha'ara. So therefore that's why I didn't say it. So there's this machlekes regarding if it's true that the metal vessel, like Rabbeinu Tam says, would have the halacha of Nazir would have to megaleach on that, or Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen says not true. The Nazir would not be megaleach, and therefore the equivalent would be that the Kohen also would not be muzar. We don't say that the kli matches it has the same halacha like the mess itself, and so therefore that's the machlekes. But Taisa then says from our sugya it's difficult on Rabbi Yitzchak misimfoint. Why? Because the Mishnah Masechtas Alois, he says, refers to metal and other vessels. He says that all vessels learn off of metal vessels, that we say chevarei kechel. He says it's even other vessels. He says, how could you say that? Now, so you say clearly that if you touch other vessels, that the guy's only with tummy till the evening. So it says you could push that away a little bit, because he says that the Gemara is asking over here, what, b'nei hazanin? Do you think that the guy who touched the vessel has to spray himself? Why not? If you say chevarei kechel is also by other vessels too, then yeah, of course you would have to spray yourself day 3, day 7. So it says Taisus, no, that you could say that's not going on the case of Keil Menogim and Mess. It's actually going in the case of the Mitzayra of the Yimei Svarim Megamrei. What I mean, although the Gemara is quoting Keil Menogim and Mess, Taisus says it'll be like V'chulu. It's not really going in the case, like V'chulu. Keil Menogim and Mess, V'chulu, meaning it's going on Yimei Svarim Megamrei. They're not B'nei Hazan, because Mitzayra doesn't have to spray himself, he doesn't have Tumas Mess. Taisus says, Lo Nirali Tzarchin, That's from Rabbeinu Peretz. But he says Rabbeinu Yitzchak does bring a right to his opinion that it applies to all vessels, not just metal, from the Tosefta Masechtas Kelim. The Tosefta talks about a case of a flask that's put into an oven, and the opening of the flask is above the oven, and it has a bone the size of a barleycorn wrapped in palm bast or in paper, and it's placed inside the flask. So the flask is tar and the oven is tar. The flask is tar because the bone is wrapped in this palm bast, and therefore it's not exposed to the flask. And the tanner is tar because although there's tum inside of the oven, but that's only if it's toiche and not toich. It's not in the oven itself, it's inside the flask that's inside the oven. But let's say a tar person comes along and grabs a hold of it and picks it out, that person is going to be tummy. Why? Although he's not touching the bone, but he did hesed. He caused it to move. That's masa. So that's going to be tummy from the bone. Then the person is tummy. He contaminates the flask that he's touching, which then that flask goes and contaminates the oven, because now the flask is tummy and it's inside the oven, which is making it tummy. Oh, so says Rabbeinu Yitzchak, obviously you see that the flask is like the person, and therefore becomes an avatama to be mitame the oven. How could the oven become tummy? It should be a rishon. No, obviously the person who's touching the bone, he's becoming avatama, and the flask is also becoming avatama. The flask is not made out of metal, so it's made out of leather. So obviously we say the vessel is like the person, even if it's not metal. We consider like the person itself to be an avatama, who the person became tummy from the bone, which is aviyah voice. The flask is also going to have the same halacha like the person. Rosh Hashanah says you can reject that right because there it's actually based on a different principle. It's called the yikr b'yikr, which we actually had earlier in this Masechta, that the person becomes tummy from carrying the bone the size of a barley corn, and that which is aviyah voice tama, and at the same time that he's carrying the bone of the dead person, which is aviyah voice, that same moment he's touching the flask, and the flask is in the oven. So since he's connected to it, that's why the flask will have the same halacha. But if he was not connected, it actually wouldn't have the same halacha. So he says not a right Rabbeinu Yitzchak. But another right Rabbeinu Yitzchak brings it from a Sefri that says Kol hashiga b'hatama yitma. So why does it say that? Because it says b'chalal cherev. So the pasuk is coming to teach you on the sword that it's metama a tuma of 7 days, and whoever touches it is going to be tummy for 7 days. Comes a teacher regarding kalim and adam, which means to say a vessel and a person. Now, kalim v'adam and kalim and how do you know if there's a vessel and then a person and a vessel? It says in the pasuk, in other words, that the garments that touch a person, that are touching a dead person, are also tummy for 7 days. Now, says Rabbeinu Yitzchak, stam begadim sounds like garments, even though they're not metal. So you see that the garments will have the halacha as the person himself that's tummy for 7 days. The garments are also how the garments tummy for 7 days. Obviously, because the kli is like the person itself. So Rabbeinu Tam, no, it's actually from these week's parashas. The metal ornaments are also called begadim because we find in the Big Day Kahuna it says elah begadim ashiyasu, and it's considered the tzitz, which is a metal plate, and it's considered gebeged. So it could be these begadim that are tummy for 7 days, like the person himself, are actually only dafka metal and not other. So there's no raya. But Tais ends up with a kalal. He says that when you have a vessel touching a dead person, and you have the vessel touching a person, and a person touching vessels, they're all like the person and the vessel, meaning to say it could maintain that tumah. The person who's touching that person, the vessel is touching him. The vessel touching that person could be, and then the person touching that, and then the garment touching him. They could all have the tumah 7 days. But when you have a vessel touching a vessel, a person touching a person, it always goes down one level, because this halacha that the kli matzah is like the mess itself, because of cherei kechal. That is one thing. And also a keli in the Adam, it says v'chibasta migdechin is to wash his garments, but that's when it switches from a vessel to a person to vessel. But a keli to keli, that we never find that it'll have the same thing. And so to a keli b'shlishi is only going to be tamas erev, and whether that's a person or a vessel. But a keli in the Adam, the keli could be like the Adam, just like the person tummy for 7 days. Also, this vessel that's touching the person, it could be tummy for 7 days. And the kelim in the mess, like we say, is like a mess, just like a mess of Yavai Satuma to Mitam Adam Kelim Tamazayin. So to the kelim Mitam Adam Kelim to Tamazayin, and nothing more than that. Again, that's Tais's conclusion about this whole discussion about Kabbalah. We ended over and said it's not a raya. It could be Tumas Eretz Amim, would be Tamei Mishum Avira, and the fact that it says you have a Zaz Gimel Bazayim, that could be going on Shara, just like we have a Shara of either Kelim or Yavai, or like Tais's brought because we make Gamma Mesarai. Thank you to any time for hosting us.